Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment or two. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tippie Career Webinar on Performance Evaluations. My name is Barbara Thomas, and I am the Executive Director of Alumni and Constituent Engagement for the Tippie College of Business, and I will be your moderator today. This webinar is one of the many webinars produced by the Tippie College's Alumni Relations Office. Now, on May 25th, we will be presenting another webinar, this one on navigating a career pivot, 5 steps to consider when making a change. So later during this webinar, I will put a link to that in the chat so that you can register. Now, the Tippie College's webinars cover a wide range of topics, from what is happening in the micro and macro economy to the Great Resignation or the business of nonprofit governance. Now, the wonderful thing about all of these webinars is that they're all recorded and they're all available on the college's YouTube channel. So if you missed one of our stellar webinars, then there's no worry. You can simply go to the Tippie College YouTube channel to see what else is available to you. And just a reminder, our webinars are free and they are open to anyone. So if you ever see one of our webinars and you think of a friend, a coworker, or an associate who might gain something from that, please share the information with them and have them register as well. So before we begin our webinar, I do want to turn this over to Tippie Dean, Amy Christoph Brown, for a welcome. Amy?
Thank you, Barb. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted that you're here joining us today for our career webinar series. As Barb has already alluded to, we have significantly increased our webinar programming over the last 2 years. We have a variety of different ways that we want to continue to engage with you in terms of faculty experts, in terms of panel discussions, and perhaps most importantly, in terms of these career webinars. These are really focused on skill building opportunities for you so that we can stay engaged with you throughout your career. We know that you've spent time with us here in Iowa City or maybe in Des Moines or the Quad Cities, and we want to make sure that we continue to be there for you wherever you're located. So thank you for being here today. Thank you to all of the people who are presenting this webinar and the others, and to Barb and her team for coordinating all of these fantastic webinars, which as she's mentioned, you can continue to find on our YouTube channel. So thank you for joining us today, everyone. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much, Amy. So before we begin today, I do want to go over some housekeeping items. So we have enabled the live transcription service offered by Zoom for our hearing impaired guests. Now, if you don't want to see this, you can turn them off. All you have to do is go to the live transcription button that should be located at the bottom of your screen and click on the caret beside that, and you'll see the option to hide subtitles. Now, you can also enlarge the subtitles if you do like using them by simply clicking on subtitle settings. Now, a reminder to you that these captions are auto-generated and are only available in English. Now, throughout our event, we encourage you to submit questions to us through the Q&A button, which is also located on the bottom of your screen. And we'll do our best to address as many questions as we can during our session today. So please note that the chat does work differently in the webinar platform. You have basically two options. You can send a chat to the host and all panelists, or to everyone. So if you have a resource to share with your fellow attendees, make sure you send your message to everyone. Now, lastly, I do want to remind you about your option to select how you view this webinar. Now, for those of you on a regular computer, in your top right-hand corner of most computer screens, you'll see the view option. And that will provide you with the opportunity to choose speaker view or gallery view. For this webinar, we recommend speaker view. Now, since our presenter has PowerPoint slides, you do have the option to increase or decrease the size in relation between the slides and the speaker's video. And all you do is you have to just click that little line that's in between those two items, and you can kind of slide it across. So if you want to see a really big image of Dee Hurst while she's speaking, you can do that. And last but not least, please remember that all of our webinars are recorded and are available on our YouTube channel. So today it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Dee Hurst has worked for both the University of Iowa and Iowa State University in career services roles, directing their efforts for business and liberal arts students. She began her higher education career as a program assistant in minority student affairs at Iowa State, and also interned at the Iowa House of Representatives for the Speaker of the House. She holds a BA in economics and political science and an MS in student development, both from Iowa State University. She is certified in business etiquette and has presented on a variety of career and management topics to professionals in higher education, business, and government. Dee spent 15 years as a senior director of human resources for the Tippie College of Business before transitioning to work in career services. Today, she is the senior associate director of graduate career services for the Tippie College. So please join me in welcoming Dee Hurst. Dee, take it away.
Hey, thanks everyone. It's great to be here. I saw some names that were frequent flyers, so welcome back. And for those of you that are new, we hope the next 50 minutes are going to give you a few takeaways that will help your career in the future. So making the most of your performance review might not seem like the most exciting topic. And in fact, one thing that's going to be really important is this cartoon, because I think it pretty much typifies what a lot of people think. Some of you are on that ledge because you have to get a performance review, and some of you that are management are on the ledge because you're supposed to give that review. So a few years back, there was a whole lot of excitement when Deloitte and Microsoft decided, oh, we're going to get rid of the performance review. We're not going to do it anymore. And we're all thinking that might fly, except that the alternative was more frequent feedback and more intensive focus on goals and expectations. So there's a trade-off here, and we're going to present today's program to kind of look at whatever system you have in place at your current organization. How can you optimize it? What are some common mistakes? And I'm being joined by a couple of alums that I'm very proud to have with us today that are going to also share a little bit more on that management perspective. So the goals, as you kind of noticed when you signed up, is we're going to look at some individual strategies. So of this visual, we're all in that box that said, no matter how entry level up to senior we all are going to have a performance review done. So P3 stands for a little acronym that we're going to look at that helps you format and strategize. Manager insight is going to be a little bit of feedback on tips and suggestions from our panel. And then obviously, HR comes into play. I know during performance review time, I barely got my calls answered. HR was not everybody's biggest friend, but we are going to talk a little bit more about how you can use HR partner, whether you be a manager or an individual performer. The bottom line is that management still needs to know how goals are being met, and employees need to still know how their work is being viewed and valued. And the biggest thing is our expectations being cleared. So many of you are going to look at this and say, that's a lot of information. And we're going to take these 4 words, and I'd love to have you write them down or make sure you print out when you get the PowerPoints, because these are areas, each in their own way, where I see the biggest mistakes in terms of how people don't optimize their own performance review. So let's start with the one that can be the most challenging, and that is align. I think I probably took a big gasp when someone very bluntly said to me, not all good work, Dee, is going to see a tangible reward. And the part of me that was, the manager side, why wouldn't all good work see a tangible reward? And they went into detail and said, because it's not tied to our vision. So I think we have this idea that, well, the projects that I work on, they're all good, but the bad projects, that's what's going to be backburnered. I think what our panelists might share, and others can as well, is that most of the projects are good and they are great ideas, but we can't do them all. And so there's going to need to be an alignment of what you are after and how your role fits in. So if you want to pretend that you're in that interview, I'm going to ask you this question: how does your role contribute to the overall vision? Now, I have to laugh because we have this wonderful little mouse pad that had all of our vision statements listed on it. And it's amazing. The first one, let's talk about one here at Tippie: work collaboratively within the college, across the campus, and with our external stakeholders. So if part of your job involves, well, I don't work with stakeholders, maybe I'm in a back infrastructure position, you can still talk about how do you contribute to other units in your area? How do you collaborate? Are you a go-to person? Your goals and the company's goals need to mesh. And when people don't feel that connection, there can be a problem with alignment, which can end up being who gets promoted, who gets given the choice projects, and who might be left to kind of stagnate in the role they're in. Keeping in mind, accountability is the key part. This is not, we're getting 5 stars, everybody leaves the performance review warm and fuzzy. It's an accountability of, let's look at our goals. Now, if some of you are kind of cringing a little, here's a line I heard a lot. Goals, what goals? Oh yeah, I guess I need to look at the goals we set 11 months ago and figure out what's going on. Don't say that's never happened to you, because I know that has happened to many of you. So when you think about your goals, you need to also think about what skills are you using and where are the needs most prioritized. So alignment is probably an area where people just get in their silo and they don't think about how it fits in the big picture. Awareness is part of what we looked at when we were first thinking about this program on how can I document what I do? One of the questions that came in on the registration: how can I let my boss know, what I'm doing day to day and how that contributes and what impact that has? So do your own SWOT analysis. You're going to be looking at your strengths, but also your weaknesses. If you know your weaknesses, you can step into that performance review with a plan. You don't wait for the manager necessarily to share a weakness. You say, in the 3rd quarter, I struggled with this part of the assignment. I asked for some help and I got some additional insight. In hindsight, 2020, here's what I would do differently. So your awareness needs to obviously, hit on your superpowers. We'll hit on that on growth, but also look at where your weaknesses are at. Remember that you need to respect differences. There can be cultural bias, but there can also be age bias. There can be gender bias. There can be, wow, Dee, you went to Iowa State University. Oh, my bias on that is so incredibly high. We're only going to talk to you if you're a Hawkeye. So we want to talk about how we can respect those differences. And in fact, a key management important fact, I think, is don't hire an identical team. I hope our panelists can talk a little bit about that. That may be the most homogenous team that gets along the best, but it's not necessarily the team that's going to deliver. Awareness also, and we could have a whole 1-hour webinar on this, is when is it time to go? Because ultimately, if you feel that the opportunities are not there and you've done your due diligence, it might be time to say, where do I need to be in the next 1 to 2 years in order to meet some of the goals? Specific is set in every performance review training you've got. And so I want to talk about specific that you're bringing up what's your documentation. And, if you're in a metric oriented type of role, some of these can be pretty easy, but here's something that's going to be important. It doesn't necessarily need to be a metric or a key performance indicator. It can also be your value add in terms of how are you as a teammate? What is your communication style? Are you the person that can get a very diverse group and actually get them pulling together? That's a value add, but people diminish it because they think, well, that's not increasing sales 22%. We need to think about how your values relate to the vision and the alignment and your unit's role in the overall goal of where you're at. Now, one thing that's going to be really important is that, and here's the mistake I see. People say, start a booster file. Start that file where you throw in all those good thank yous and people loved your work. But people don't do that intentionally. And so one tip that I want to recommend when we talk about specific is set aside some time every month to debrief what's been happening. So when I walk into my performance review, I might be able to tell my supervisor, my last quarter was challenging, and here's why. But let's look at what my wins were for first, second, and third quarter. There's something called a currency bias. And a currency bias means I'm going to remember what you just did. So, man, I'm going to remember Dee had a bad last quarter. And that's going to flavor that potential performance review. My job as that individual contributor is I'm going to give my boss as much information as possible on what my wins were throughout the year. And to do that, you need to be intentional about carving out that time and putting in not only those booster files, like, yes, keep those thank yous, get those endorsements on LinkedIn, but also ask yourself, if I were to do this project again, how would I do it differently? Growth means mastering superpowers. And I'm going to throw my bias right out here. I think that there's some value in understanding where your gaps are at when we looked at our specifics, but also try to understand that opportunity cost if you spend too much time on gaps that are not really relevant and don't align with what it is you need to do for the unit. So concentrate on mastering what you do best. It doesn't mean those things are easy for you, but they become the basis of how you're known. What's your brand? How can you be counted on? And what's the expectation for you? Expand your existing area, especially for some of you that are new in the field or changing and pivoting into a new area. But uncover new opportunities and understand that your manager can help with that and HR can help with that. And then think about forward-thinking goals, because the performance review, in my opinion, the best ones are 25% past because you've been keeping up with that through the year, and 75% future-oriented. So P3 I mentioned early on, and I want to kind of give you a system that's going to help you get started. So the first thing is you do need to look at your year in review, but unlike what you've heard before, I want you to look at it in terms of how is it aligning with the goals. When a student comes in a coaching appointment and they say, my whole team got reorged out and I'm furloughed. I don't know where I'm going. I didn't see it coming. What I would love to recommend is that performance review be a point where you ask your manager, how's the team aligning? What are you hearing in your senior management meetings that you can share? And how can you make that fit with what I can contribute? Remember, the documentation is qualitative and quantitative. Don't be shy. The Iowa nice sometimes comes through as like, well, the team did all this. I do want to know how the team performed, but I want to know what your individual contribution on that team was as well. So this may be a chance for you to role model if you're extremely uncomfortable talking about yourself, and making sure that there's a happy middle ground where you don't have to boast, but you're going to get that information. When people go into the planning, I always say, what's the scariest thing your manager could ask or say to you? And usually they'll come up with something that's a lot scarier than what the manager is actually going to say. But if you kind of prepare in your planning for that, they're going to go back, Dee, to that last quarter where you were commenting. Jump in there and talk about that first. You be the one that brings up, there was a challenge, not with excuses, but two things. What did you learn from it? What have you already done? And here's a magic question that I think my manager panel, I hope, will agree with. Ask your manager, what would you have done? What might your insight be? Could there be a different way I could have handled or angled that situation? Positioning means, how do you get the rest of your documentation in order? Remember when we talked about alignment? Here's 3 things I want you to have in your hand. I want you to have an org chart. How many of you can get your hands on your org chart? Your unit org chart, department, and perhaps the overall org chart. I need to know, so that we have a realistic idea, where is there a possible place to grow into, and or what other units outside of your own might potentially be a place where you could contribute. Along with your org chart, you're going to want to have the vision statement or mission statement. You're also for the unit and for your department, but you're also going to want to have last year's review. All of this is for the positioning of understanding the big picture. If you're feeling kind of stunted because there's nowhere to go, maybe the org chart is kind of showing you there isn't anywhere to go. So how can I better manage getting some lateral skills or developing something that I feel is hot in the marketplace right now? This is where you articulate what your future options are. And this is also a part of that question of should I stay or should I go? We tend to not want to face that until we're forced to. I'm going to ask you, while it's not a threat, to consider what your future options can be and anticipate what the roadblocks may be. If that next level of management, for example, is someone who you anticipate is going to be there another 5 years, then that could be a roadblock. You may want to look at where there could be a different opportunity for you to stretch your leadership goals. And this is one that I think we all have magic discussions, influential comments in our brain, and then we try to talk and we don't get it out. You have to be able to present. So start with, what is the purpose of the meeting? So sometimes I've seen people make mistakes going into the meeting going, we're going to talk about salary in this meeting. Oh, we're going to talk about promotions in this meeting. And the manager is going, wait a minute, where did that come from? We're not talking about any of those things. We're talking about goals in this meeting. We're talking about new funding. We're talking about different items. So make sure that before the meeting actually occurs, you've clarified what the purpose is. If you've done your year in review, you probably have the equivalent of War and Peace at hand. All right. You have 10,000 pieces of documentation. I can assure you, your manager wants the executive summary. How do you prioritize? Maybe your biggest achievement wasn't the one that's in most direct alignment with what's the hot area that's going to be promoted. And so you're going to make some decisions on that executive. If you can't get it accomplished or it's not a topic for that meeting, it doesn't mean we can't talk salary or compensation. It doesn't mean we can't talk career options, but you'll probably want to do a follow-up discussion. So I want to give a big shout out to one of the folks that wrote on the RSVP form that they kind of wanted to know a little bit more about how can I be more visible? You said in the promo for this, you're going to talk about visibility. And I'm going to talk a little bit about something I'm going to call intentional visibility. And here are some things that I think need to be on. So this is just an example of, as you do your self-assessment, what are some areas that you think you want to work on and how can we set some sub-goals? So don't wait for your boss to say, you know, I want you to be more visible, Dee. I need to have you get out and about. You bring it up and you talk to your supervisor. Are there meetings I can attend in your place or join you? Is that a possibility? So I can get visibility with a wider circle of leadership. The answer may be no. The answer may be nope. They only allow the people that are on that committee to attend. But the answer may be yes. If you want to get involved, you need to think a little bit more about how does that look? How do I get involved? Well, you might have gone to some other people in different departments and said, hey, there's this webinar the alumni group is doing at noon today. Do you want to watch it with me and talk about it for 10 minutes afterwards? There's going to be ways where you can say, I've got to get out of my silo and out of my shell and get a little bit more involved. Speaking up, there are some absolutely great training sessions on how to run meetings if you're a new manager, but more importantly, there's not going to be a lot of visibility if you go to meetings and you never speak up. So if you think that that's going to be one of your areas where you could be, you know, have a question about where that can, you know, lead you, you've got to be able to speak up. You don't have to wait for the perfect answer before you speak up at those meetings. Finding a sponsor. This is different than your manager. Okay, this is somebody who may have a pretty vested interest in helping you succeed, but they're not directly responsible along with the whole team for your, you know, actual performance review. Those sponsors can give you insight. Those sponsors can hand you names for information interviews. Reach out. You know, maybe you want to call somebody in accounting if you're in marketing and say, let's have coffee. I know the accountant may be a little shocked to hear from somebody in marketing, but there can be some value in expanding out from the people that you always have lunch or coffee with or that you always have in your network. And using previous skills can be important, but I want to keep a close eye on the time here so that we move through. So put the Cheetos down. It's time to think about something before we get to our panel where you're actually going to do some action steps based on some of those things we just discussed. So you need to start off with know your baseline. You need to know how you align, what you can document that you've done across the year and not recency bias. And you need to know where might there be some challenges, where might your supervisor have some concerns, and what are you doing independent of what they're going to suggest in order to improve your positioning on that. So know your baseline, of which the words align and aware are the key to being prepared for that. You have to tell your story. Again, one of the other ones, I think, Barb, you sent it, was, how can I articulate my impact versus just doing my job? You have to take the just doing your job and tie it into an outcome that is impactful. And again, that's not always easy to do in some roles, but it's there. And you need to work, again, with a mentor, a sponsor, to tell your story. It is awareness. This is what I can do well. It's also very specific. And your goals tend to be the part people just breeze through, but the goals can be part of developing your brand. And your brand is not, oh, that's a person who's unreliable. Oh, that's a person who comes up with 20 excuses. Your goals and succeeding at your goals can be developing your brand as someone who's reliable, someone for whom a succession planning team might be eyeing you for future promotions. What can you bring that's going to be needed? So let's just look at some samples. Now, these may not fit you at all. Some of them I've already alluded to, but what you're going to leave here right now is think about each one of those 4 words. What can you do to get ready for alignment? So get that org chart, get a vision statement, get your last year's review. If it is unfortunately something you haven't looked at in 11 months, then just own it and decide what you're going to do differently. So what could be an action step that's a sub-step of this one? You know what? I'm going to make a different meeting with my manager to talk about goals. So maybe your one-on-one with your manager is all about what? What sounds most common for your one-on-one? What are the projects? What progress are we making? Has everybody met their deadlines? Are you talking about goals necessarily other than those tactical goals, those operational goals? I want you to think more strategic. I want you to think more mapping. Schedule a half hour a month. That, again, this is just made up, but it can be somebody's goal out there. Some of you might be writing this down on Outlook to debrief your work for that quarter. Now, I'm not going to call it booster file anymore. It's going to have positives, but it's also going to be at, you know what? I'm going into my performance review and I'm going to look at Maggie and say, Maggie, what was your biggest achievement February of last year? October of last year? And you're going to be able to say, yeah, I've got that down. I've done some debriefing on what I've done well. Another sample action step that will help is where you bring forward, I'm going to do 2 trainings or book reviews. I've got a couple books that I've been popping in on some of these slides of topics of value. Now, okay, this isn't just for fun and games. How do you gain visibility? You bring forward an idea from one of those books at a team meeting. When we talk about speaking out at meetings, some of you are MBA or business analytics students. You might be able to say, in this course, we're focusing on some areas that I think could be immediately applicable. We're not getting those degrees to just put the letters after our names. We're getting those degrees so that we can bring forward skills, ideas, creativity. And this one's a little bigger, but I think it's really important. I would almost suggest that every single one of you has this on your action steps. Seek out a sponsor or mentor. Seek out possible release time for a stretch project or doing something that you haven't done before that your manager is in support of. If your manager isn't because of time constraints, talk about how you can get some exposure to that. And or look at a professional group outside your unit, because what we're trying to do with this last goal or action step is in the performance review. What makes you different from the other 5 people your manager is managing? Well, it might be that you are forward thinking, you're getting, hey, I not only am looking at how it's done at Amazon, I'm looking at how our competitors are doing it. I'm looking at some trending information. I'm following a thought influencer on LinkedIn that actually is looking at marketing in the specific niche area. And you bring forward some of that as something consistently. So I've done a lot of talking and I'm ready for a sip, but what I'm most excited about is I'm going to toss it immediately over to a couple of alums who will introduce themselves, maybe take a few minutes to talk about their role in managing the performance process, and they'll be available when we get through a few more slides to talk toward the end of the program. So Maggie, I'm going to start with you and please take it away.
Thank you, Dee. And hello, everyone, even though I can't see you. I know you're out there, and I'm so glad that you're here. I am Maggie Jesse. I'm the Senior Director of the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Technology in the Central IT Unit at the University of Iowa. And I am proud to say I'm a 2003 Tippie MBA, and it has served me well. A little history about me that's specific to how I manage others. I started managing people in 1986 when I was the business manager for a small municipal hospital, and I started work at the UI in 1989. So I've really been managing people for a very, very long time. The last 15 years of that has been in the Central IT Unit at the University of Iowa. And prior to that, I was at the Tippie College of Business for 17 years, the last 6 of which were as the Collegiate IT Director. Dee has talked a lot about tips for your own performance review and how to make it more productive. I wish I would have talked to Dee and heard this from Dee many years ago. But what I'm going to do today is focus more on the performance review from my side, from the manager side. The UI does require an annual performance review, like so many employers, but I don't like to think about it as a requirement. Even though I meet my requirements with all my staff, I don't like to think of it that way. I firmly believe that the performance review shouldn't be treated as a point in time, and Dee has hit this several times. It's an ongoing discussion between you and your manager. And I also believe that there should never be surprises at a performance review. So if a goal hasn't been being met, that shouldn't be suddenly apparent at the performance review. That should have been a discussion all the way along that path. Individual staff performance support should be seen really through the lens of a coach or a mentor, and an ongoing relationship that sort of supports that required performance review, but it builds on a common understanding of performance and career development. And that's really where I see my role with my staff. If I'm developing people to be leaders and developing their career, then I can really mostly count on them to meet their own goals and to pay attention to their own work and make themselves visible, as Dee pointed out. I do try to have bi-weekly one-on-ones with my direct reports, or a shorter weekly one-on-one depending on the role of the individual. And I always have an open door policy so that staff can stop in and use me as a mentor or coach to drop things in on me. Even though I do that, I do work hard to allow my direct reports as much autonomy as I possibly can. And that really served us well during the pandemic. This was a time when I had a fully on staff, my staff were completely and fully on campus. And suddenly, literally overnight, they moved home to work from home. And the performance of that group was really apparent in how they had been coached and mentored to be autonomous leaders in their right, and it did serve us really well. So maybe a little bit of advice for you, especially about coaches and mentoring. They're critical to all of us. They can help us through the performance review. They can help us to build out our own career development and also our daily goals. And I go to mine regularly for advice. I have many coaches and mentors. I try to have the same mentorship coach relationship with my supervisor as I do with my direct reports. And I've got a lot of trusted colleagues across ITS. One other thing that I would mention about the performance review is really what I want here at the performance review, as much about what someone has achieved during the year, is about the struggles and the barriers that kept them from achieving. And it's my job to remove those barriers. So I want to hear from them about how I am or am not removing barriers for them so that they can be successful. So those are a little bit of my tips. And I want to turn it over to Michael and make sure he has plenty of time to give us some as well. Michael.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Maggie, and thanks for having me today. It's nice to get out here and talk to some folks out in the business. I am Michael Lowen. I'm a team leader over at Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield in Des Moines in the business intelligence and product segment strategy analytics. That's my team's name. It's way too long. So we call ourselves BIPSA colloquially. But I have a background. I have an MBA from the University of Iowa. I have a master's of analytics from the University of Iowa as well. Unfortunately, I have that undergrad from Iowa State. So Dee, I hope you don't hold it against me. But I've been doing analytics now for something like 13 years. In all different variety. I moved to Iowa 7 years ago and started working at Walmart really to get my master's through the university. So it's been an exciting journey since then. And I've been doing, getting performance reviews and trying to really hone in on how I get them for myself and deliver my brand message to my leader and giving them to people now for the last about 4 years. I would say that when it comes to performance reviews from the leadership side and what I'm attempting to do in those situations, I think that some of the things that have really worked for us on my team and the analytics department and at Wellmark as a whole is we certainly have an enterprise, performance review process that's a yearly cadence process that's sort of demanded to do, as everybody's kind of alluded to. However, we've broken ours down into something called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results, which is from a book called Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And those force us into goal setting on a more regular cadence and a review on a more regular cadence, which allows us to kind of build in that structure for while corporately we're not really necessitating anything quarterly, it forces us on our team to really evaluate how we are performing on a more regular cadence and align with our business partners, because in analytics, we're a support unit, on what their needs are and how we're achieving those goals for them. That's really helped out a lot on making sure that we're not just waiting till the end of the year before we flip back to our goals and go, oh shoot, I need to do all this other stuff so I can hit my goals, even though maybe some of those things aren't even pertinent anymore. And it helps you to track the things that you have hit, the things that you've mastered, the things that you've done along the way, that you can go back at the end of the year and say, hey, look at all the cool stuff I've done over the year to support the business and the value that I've added. That's the big thing. As a manager, I'm always looking for what the value you added is. It doesn't mean profit. It doesn't necessarily mean reduction of costs directly. It can be how you made something more efficient, how you optimized a process, how you helped your peers. But speaking in terms of value, when you're providing your specific recommendations and when you're planning for yourself, that's what I want to hear, is that specific value statement that you're saying. And that can also be value that you have increased in yourself. So the reinvestment that you've done within yourself is something that you should be braggadocious somewhat about. And that requires, again, for you to have a forethought plan. I always say that as a team leader, I have 3 requirements of my people. 1 is to solve problems, 2 is to make offers, and 3 is to have a development plan. Everybody on my team, those are the 3 things that they should be doing on a regular cadence. And that development plan is just as important as the other items, because it's really hard to improve constantly if you don't know where you want to go. So going out, drawing that map, where can I move in the company? What do I want to do? Do I want to stay in the silo that I'm in? Do I want to move outward? And then communicating that to your leader so that they know what your goals are super important. If you don't have a leader who's asking you those things and who wants to get you to that job outside of their team, I might look for a different leader, if I'm going to be honest with you, because there should be people that really want to drive you to new challenges and to grow, even if it's not on their team. I hope for my team that they don't work for me for the rest of their life. I would consider that a failure on my part if they did. I want them to be better, stronger, and to grow into whatever they want to do. And part of that's back on those OKRs, having those conversations and those cadences and saying, I'm going to have at least one learning agenda item that I'm going to do every single quarter. And then at the end of the year, I can say, here's all the new things I've learned for this year. That really bolsters that kind of experience in development and how you can kind of set goals for both yourself and make sure you meet goals for the company. And all of that then aligns on those one-on-ones, those check-ins, so that you are revisiting that on a regular cadence. Certainly, you want to have conversations about the key projects. But with my team, I always like to reserve some time at the beginning for our weekly one-on-ones. I meet with everybody on my team once a week. And I like to reserve some time for them to ask me questions, number 1, then tell me about their projects. And then the last part, let's have a development conversation. Let's talk about where you are. Let's talk about where you're going. Let's talk about what the gaps might be. I could talk about this for a while, but I wanted to touch on just some mistakes that I think I had early on in my leadership journey when I kind of transitioned over. And one of them was I probably wasn't specific enough with my peers on what I was expecting of them. And so I think that level of specificity is very important as a leader, going down to your peers. These are the exact things I'm expecting of you with that role. So much so that we actually developed a skill set matrix. We have skills for, the corporate values that we have as a company, but we went a level further and we said, these are the skills that you should have at each level of your role. And then we went out and we specifically defined them and then wrote people where we scored them on those skills. So then we could have growth conversations in those one-on-one meetings for yearly review and planning sessions on how those development plans might happen. I wasn't specific enough on the onset, and that grew into us creating more specificity and rigor around a specific process for development as an organization. And then secondly, give praise. As a leader, I'm not great at it. I'm going to be honest with you. I know this. I work on it consistently. I tell my team yell at me when I'm not giving you enough praise, right? Like, that's okay. Give me that feedback. I need feedback just like you need feedback. And the big thing there is it's important to connect that praise throughout the year to the specific activities that they've done. So if you're giving a merit raise or you're giving a specific raise, make sure that you're connecting that to why they did those things. People should know that they're important. And the development and growth conversations as part of the yearly review process are very important. But so is the process by rewarding them and saying, hey, here's why you're getting this. Let's connect the dots between the specific initiatives the specific value that you're delivering to the business and the specific value that we're going to deliver you as a part of that.
Thank you both. And I think this kind of follows up a lot of what both Maggie and Michael shared with us. We all wish for managers that are vested in our futures and our development. But one thing that, we talked about the 4 words, we talked about the 3 Ps, getting some kind of structure, all important. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say for managers or for individuals, if there is one lifelong career skill that you can work on, it's the acceptance without defensiveness of constructive feedback. Now, if you think how hard it is to go up to somebody and say, you've got spinach in your teeth, wow, I don't want to tell them they're walking around with spinach in their teeth, then, why are we so surprised that people don't get good feedback? There's a Watson Wyatt worldwide survey that said 60% of employees in their survey said they don't get adequate feedback from their managers. Here's what's not adequate feedback. And I think you heard it from our 2 panelists. Wow, you're doing great. Sure glad you're on my team. Rah, rah, you helped us get through COVID. You did this. Well, what's specific? So go back to what Michael said. What did you exactly do? And I see a lot of that. It's almost like management sees that box and says, don't forget to check the box to say everybody did a wonderful job, instead of saying, how can I know my employees well enough to know what they're doing right, but also where are the gaps? Can I listen to them? Can I find out what they're struggling with? If it's awkward and you say 10 positive things, what are we as humans always going to focus on? We're going to focus on the one somewhat negative thing. We're like, forget the 9 things. They didn't like it when I did X. And that's why I say work on the defensiveness, because that is going to help your career, because you're going to learn. Now, I'm going to steal a story from one of our panelists here, and it's the Top Chef story. Okay, so if any of you are watchers of the Top Chef, it's a competition where young chefs are judged and they move on to great glory in their field. And there are these times where they're lined up and the judging chefs just rip into them. I mean, they tell them every micro thing they did wrong. And you see the chef standing there with their hands behind their back, and they'll say, thank you, chef. Thank you, chef. Thank you, chef. And you know that they're defensive, right? Like their hands are behind their back. Anybody want to guess? What are their hands doing behind their back? Like they're clenching because it's not fun. And that was the eye-opening moment for me in HR when someone said, Dee, you're doing all this training on getting better word choice, being able to deliver difficult information or difficult conversations. All good. Don't dismiss any of that. But the thing that resonated when I heard this speaker was, we're not going to get rid of that defensiveness. So get the Kleenex out. It might be anger. Have our 2 panelists met up with angry employees occasionally? Might they burst into tears? Get comfortable with that, neutralize it down, take some deep breaths, and stay on point, because you're not personally attacking them. You're providing feedback that you hope will be taken. Thank you, chef. Thank you for that information, and moving forward. And if you have difficulty, that is where there's some great resources out there. So let's talk about the manager's watch list. Like, one thing we need to remember when I said debate the opposite story, this gentleman with his hands by his head, who's stressed, clearly stressed, is middle management. Okay, he is my prototype of middle management, because he's hearing it from employees, and then the woman is his manager, and she's saying, oh, you're not meeting your deliverables. Your goals are here. You need to get more. And he needs to kind of be that buffer in between. So let's take a little bit from purely unscientific but anecdotal. What did I hear from people right after the performance review process in my HR role? Well, it was mentioned by Maggie. no surprises. If these conversations have been happening, they are not surprising. Having said that, every year someone would come in going, I had no idea. I clearly thought my goal was this and their goal was that. Or they didn't even listen to the 12 things I did right. 28 minutes out of the 30-minute review was talking about the one thing I did wrong. So think a little bit more in terms of not having surprises. Let them know what's happening. Micromanagement, boy, that's tough. One manager came in and said, I used to think I was a rock star manager. And I said, what's causing the issue? Why don't you feel that way? And she said, it's because I had a team of self-managed people. I had like a high functioning team and I didn't even know it. I thought I was a great manager until, and then her reaction was to micromanage. So then it was some training and some coaching on, is micromanaging getting at the issue? You may win a battle if you use phrases like, because I'm the boss, without a business reason for that, then that's going to be winning a battle, but not winning the war. That's going to be demoralizing. So micromanagement is a key issue, but you still need to make sure that you're maintaining quality. So how does that look? Sometimes here's some questions you might want to think about. Ask, tell, ask. So if you think about that combination, ask for the self-evaluation and give your manager a good self-evaluation. Give them some beef, give them something to work with. Then you're going to be told some information from your manager's point of view. So you're going to ask, you're going to tell, and you're going to ask again. How was this performance review? Michael, how was my performance review? What did you think? So you're asking as a manager the feedback from your staff. Favoritism is very difficult, especially if you have some superstars on your team. But if you find yourself, I remember being in a situation where we used to take non-monetary bets. All right, everyone's listening to me, right? Non-monetary bets on how far into a team meeting or a large open forum before a certain person's name was mentioned. Like, is it going to be 5 minutes before that name is mentioned? Maybe it'll be 12 minutes. Because we always knew that that manager was going to shout out that one individual. So again, it's the homogenous versus being open to diversity and inclusion. We tend to potentially favor people who are like us, people who think like us, people who have the same philosophy, instead of saying, I need to make sure I'm intentionally balancing so that favoritism does not become one of the deficits of my management style. Unclear and changing expectations. Part of this is, what are you doing as managers to help your employees understand constant change? So it's one thing to look at deliverables, but it's another thing to say, how are we managing to frame the new norm and understand that those expectations, yes, we did talk about going in this direction, but I'm communicating and I'm transparent as soon as I can on how we have to shift gears. And making sure that that communication feedback loop is really working. And that, I'm going to put one word on there for managers to think about. It's building trust. It's understanding confidentiality. It's understanding that when you're talking to them, you're not talking to 3 other employees about that person, that you're keeping that coaching and mentoring relationship in a trusting place. And you ask some questions. If you could do one thing differently, what would it be? So you think about where the glitches are happening and you move on. I see Barb popping in, so we're going to hop through the perspective from HR, because I couldn't do 15 years without saying, can HR be your partner? Yeah, they're not just checking off the monitoring and the compliance box. HR is going to give you the big picture. So I would expect managers to come in and fight tooth and nail for their team members. I expect that. But those managers don't know I have 17 other managers doing exactly the same thing. And so HR can help you frame the big picture. It's not taking turns. It's not saying your unit's turn is this year, you might get it next year, but it's looking at the big picture and helping to be able to take that back to your team. HR can give you some great resources. In an hour, we just barely touched upon a few of these things to build your skills. Do you want to focus on difficult conversations? Do you want to focus on setting goals? Do you want to focus on that development plan that Michael mentioned? What are some things that can help you get some steps that will take something big like, hey, Barb, I want you to improve. Don't do that anymore. And instead you're saying, well, how am I not going to do it? What resources do I have to change? What options do I have? Or someone, or no, maybe you're being even more explicit and you'll say, I need you to work on your initiative. So I start working extra hours. I come in on the weekend, I get projects done, and then I get a low score on my performance review. And my manager says, oh, when I said initiative, I meant talk up at meetings. And I'm like, I thought you meant show up more at work. So understand that you have resources, and one-on-one coaching can be big. HR can help for individually. I've also had managers come in and say, I have to deliver some difficult conversation. Can I practice with you? And absolutely, they can provide some good feedback on that. And they can also, especially if you're relatively new in your role or company, provide a historical perspective. So we're going to hit some questions, but I deliberately chose this quote because we talk about the big flashy things. Oh, those superstars are going to get the big promotions. Those are the people that the company cares about. This George Washington Carver quote, I've always loved because it says, when you do the common things in life in uncommon ways, you will command attention of the world. One of your superpowers may be creativity. It may be looking at how you can best package the combined efforts of your team so that that whole is stronger than any one superpower individual. Know that you have a contribution to make, and that's what we want to focus on. So Barb, let's move to some questions if you would field those, because I haven't been watching chat, but I'm happy to, as will our panelists, be happy to address some questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Chef. I appreciate that feedback. Actually, Dee, I'd like you to stop sharing your screen if you could, so that we could see all of the participants in today's session. I'm going to throw out a question. It's actually kind of a combination of two questions. It has to do, like, so one person asks about rating inflation. And then in addition, there's also a question that talks about any suggestions where that person's company has a 1 to 5 rating scale. And guess what? Everyone gets a 3, right? So there's rating inflation, as well as there's the ratings when everyone's wonderful. So how do you manage that? What do you do if you're in a situation where, despite your great work, you're getting an average? Or how do you make sure, kind of from both perspectives? I think it would be helpful from the employee side as well as the manager side.
Okay. Well, let me throw it to the panelists to start, and then I've got some feedback, but I'd like to hear from the actual working leaders here, what they feel about the idea of rating and rating inflation.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that as far as ratings go, I mean, we're in the same boat. I mean, I think every company I've ever worked for, generally speaking, they have a scale of 1 to whatever it is. We're 1 to 4. You end up having some number that is your normal distribution, and you have people centered around that. And that's generally the way it works in that company. As far as how to get out of that potentially, I think it's clear expectations. At the end of the day, it's going to your manager and saying and asking, hey, I would like to be a 4 next year. What are the things that I need to learn, do, or develop that would get me from 1 to 4, and then working with them over the next several quarters, weeks, et cetera, to come up with the plan that gets you from A to B. And then you have documented evidence that says, hey, these were the expectations that were laid out for me. These are the gaps that I've closed, and here's how I closed them in accordance with our conversation. And then you're building a portfolio. Basically, you're building a legal case, right? My wife is a lawyer, so I feel like that's what I'm doing. I'm building the legal case to say this is the proof, this is the evidence that I have worked towards getting that next level.
Great. Maggie, did you?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually at the university, we used to have a 1 to 4 scale, and I fought pretty hard to get a 1 to 5 scale. And here's why. All of my directors who work for me know that middle scale is where everyone starts. And then everyone needs to be up or below on any of their rating scales through a number of different ratings, because some of us are better at some things and worse at others. So there doesn't end up being that thing of everybody in the middle, hopefully. But another practice that we have as managers is I get my directors together and they have to do a calibration exercise where we place all of the rating scales on a whiteboard, and they have to put their staff into the different areas. And then they have to make an argument to their peers about why certain people are in certain place. So why does this director have all their people below the median and this director has all their people outstanding? and they make arguments with one another, and it's amazing to watch that calibration shift apart. And also having those things tied directly to salary increases where we have limited dollars, it sort of forces you into that. People can't all be in the middle. They can't all be on either end because we only have a certain amount of money to really give out the salaries that are going to motivate people in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that. A final comment that ties both together. Also know in your organization whether those ratings matter and what they mean. So Maggie kind of tipped that off, and I'm sure, Michael, that's also true at Blue Cross Wellmark. We used to have one unit at the university that will remain nameless. They gave about 90% of their people exceeds expectations or outstandings. And then it would be, I said, how do you have that many people land in those categories? And the answer was, well, we don't have any money for raises, so it makes them feel better. Oh, okay. So if you know that going in, that's going to take that rating and put it in a different place. When I worked with Dean Sarah Gardial, she wanted to make outstanding be kind of a close to a ballpark finite 10%. So you could be a great employee. Maggie, you're fantastic. Barb, Michael, but you had an unbelievable year because of this, and you're going to get that remark. But you know what? The next year you might be down one lower, and that becomes the norm. So I'm just going to tie it up by saying, know what those ratings mean. How are they used? What impact do they have? And back to Michael's original point, what do I need to do to move that bar? Barb, next question.
You bet. Here's some kind of from the manager's perspective. How can I also help my staff make the most of their performance reviews?
Maggie, why don't you lead off?
First of all, my staff are required to fill out a self-evaluation, and they are reflective questions, and they're expected to be very reflective on their major accomplishments, how they did or didn't meet a goal. And by the way, they may have 4 or 5 goals. I always want them to be high-level goals, but it's pretty clear too that I understand that during a given year, things like, I don't know, a pandemic might keep you from meeting certain goals. Well, let's talk about what held you back from that goal. And so there's no fear of coming in and saying, yeah, I made it 75% of the way, but here's how you can help me make it the rest of the way. So that's one way I would offer is have a conversation. I really don't like check marks of, of different kinds of attributes of an employee. I want to really dig into a conversation about what happened to them over the past year.
So we're kind of coming in tight on time, and I want to squeeze this question in and maybe shoot it off to Michael. Do you have any tips for peers turned managers who are completing performance evaluations, perhaps even for the first time?
Certainly. It's as you're making that transition, it's always difficult when you go to peer leader. I think that the biggest thing is to go in there with again, it's the expectation setting, and to go in there with confidence of the expectations. Rely on your peers. There's going to be other leaders that they're at that same level that made that transition as well, and have an understanding of how they made that transition and what their expectations of their employees are. When you guys are talking about level setting across business units, that helps a lot. And so being, straightforward and honest with your employees, as well as setting firm expectations of them, allows you to get into that mindset of like, hey, this is just a conversation between the two of us, and this is our role. And that way you're not conflating those two things. You can still be friendly with people. It's just that you have to say and be honest with them. This is the role that we're in now.
Great. Well, I would like to thank all 3 of you for taking the time today to kind of put down your thoughts and share it with our audience. When this event ends in just a moment, I want to make sure everyone knows that they will receive a survey, and we'd appreciate it if you would take your time and fill out that survey. It's just a few quick questions, but you can give us some feedback, and you can even share some ideas on what else we could present on that would help you in your life, whether it's at work, personal, or whatever. So again, want to thank Dee, Maggie, Michael, so much for your time today. Any last words for our audience from all of you chefs?
Thank you for that information. Just keep that feedback loop going. I think that's going to be key, along with alignment. So if you walk away with those, work on your action steps, and you're going to be in a better place than you were 55 minutes ago.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. Remember, you will get all registrants for this email will get an email with a link to the recording where you can go see that as well as any of our other recordings on our college's YouTube channel. And as always, I want to say thank you. Hope to see you virtually at our next webinar. And as always, go Hawks.
Bye.